Welcome back. Welcome back for the second session of this event. My name is Valbona Zanelli. I'm a senior fellow with Friends of Europe and also with the Atlantic Council of the United States. We finished our first session with a sense of urgency. I'm going to start the second one with hope. For this reason, we'll start with the idea sharing titled Hope as a Practical Tool for Europe. And we'll find out more from our presenter, Thomas Coombs, founder of Hope Space Communications, if really this is a practical tool for Europe, and what is the importance of the sense of urgency in having more hope for Europe? The floor is yours.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Lovely to be here. So yeah, my name is Thomas. I'm on a mission to apply brain science to politics and political communication. I've spent around 20 years trying to make people care about Europe, care about human rights, and just care in general. But I recently realized that I've been doing it all wrong. Because the way I used to do my communication was I would start with the policy and then think of the story to sell it. But what I've realized is the story has to come first. So what we're going to talk about is this approach I've developed, which is called a hope-based approach, which I've developed to try and counter these anti-European populist narratives that are out there right now. Let me see if this is an issue for you as well. Hands up who thinks public opinion is currently going in the right direction for Europe. Hands up if you think public opinion is going well. See, one hand. Two hands. So yeah, I think we've got some stuff to talk about here. And we're going to talk about that. So I'm going to share 3 questions with you that you can use to change the narrative. Because I think it's clear we need to change the narrative around Europe. But to do that, we can't just always be in reactive mode. We have to tell our own story. How do we do that? So if you can answer these 3 questions, I think you'll be well on your way to putting a new narrative out there. The first question is vision. How would society look if you achieved your goals? How would Europe look if we had more Europe? So the challenge I see, whether it's Europe, democracy, rule of law, human rights, we often make the case for what we want by looking backwards, by looking at the dark history we have in Europe and saying, if we lose these things, we risk going back. So that's a fear-based message. But it's not enough to just tell people what we're avoiding from the past. We have to actually offer people a direction to move forward. Anyone who's ridden a bicycle knows that if you're stationary, you're very likely to fall over. We need momentum. The US commentator Ezra Klein says, if you want to get people's attention in today's media ecosystem, you can use fear or you can inspire them, like Barack Obama, but what you can't do is be boring. So we have to inspire people. We have to put a picture in their minds that shows them if we have more Europe, more democracy, more human rights, what would it actually look like to live in that world? This is important because all of us have predictive brains. Our brains are driving our decisions based on what we think is going to happen next. What that means for anyone working in politics is we can't possibly support anything we've never seen. So if we only react to the dangers and we never show people to the place we want to get to, it's not in their brain, and then they just physically cannot support it. So this brings me then to the second question that I invite you to try and answer. When the facts aren't enough, what's the moral case you make for the change you want? What's the argument you make to achieve your goal? And so this is a question about values. I'm really losing my mind at the moment right now looking at the United Kingdom, where all journalists and politicians and activists seem to be talking about one politician whose name I won't mention, but it begins with F. And they take that name and then they say, Prime Minister. We don't want F to be Prime Minister. What if he becomes Prime Minister? So has anyone read the book by George Lakoff called Don't Think of an Elephant? Hands up. So we need to change that. This is like one of the most important books about political messaging ever. And so this book is called Don't Think of an Elephant, because what you fight, you feed. When you talk about what you're against, you're actually reinforcing it. Because ideas are little neurons in our brain. And when you call to mind two ideas at the same time, you're reinforcing them. Our brain is literally fusing. It's called neurons that fire together, wire together. So when I say F and Prime Minister, I'm making this connection in our brain. Oh, maybe he'll be a Prime Minister one day. And so we start to make the danger familiar. The same thing happened with Donald Trump. It happened with Geert Wilders in the Netherlands. The more we talk about the thing we're afraid of, the more it starts to feel real. It starts to fill the whole political stage, and so we can't think of any other kind of politician or leader. So, a simple tool you can use. Every time you talk about what you're against, also say what you're for. Maybe the person you want to be leader, or just even the kind of leader you want. We don't want F, we want a caring leader, a leader who cares about us. So this work is actually about articulating what it is we're actually for. So for Europe, what we might want to do is ask ourselves, what is the mindset, the way of thinking that underpins support for Europe, or any other policy, but that way of thinking? So for me, well, there was research done in focus groups a few years ago, asking people, trying to find out the words, the concepts, the ideas, that if they're stronger in society, make people more likely to support Europe. And those words were things like community, solidarity, and above all, what one focus group participant said, the foundation of everything for us is empathy. So without those mindsets being strong in our society, we can never have European integration. The philosopher Martin Nussbaum talks about fear being the tool of the authoritarian, of the monarch, because they want all the power for themselves. So they want us to be afraid of other people and not trust them. Whereas a democracy depends on a much more hopeful mindset, because we trust power to our fellow citizens. And in Europe, that's just even on a much higher scale, because we're all sharing our power and our resources together in this community. So that's why we can't just take for granted solidarity, empathy, community. These are things we have to nurture. Neuroscience tells us that empathy and kindness, they're like muscles that we can train. The more we use solidarity, the more we practice it, the stronger it gets. That's why the people who are against Europe and want to tear it down are starting by picking on refugees and migrants, because they're actually reinforcing a way of thinking that is selfish, self-interest, being cruel, because that also undermines Europe. Europe is built on us caring about each other, taking care of each other. Trying to build a Europe without care and solidarity, it's a little bit like that elephant I told you not to think about trying to ride a bicycle. They're not going to get very far, and as we know, in Europe, when they fall over, it's going to cause a lot of damage. That's really key. Remember, don't think of an elephant. So you're now thinking of that elephant. So what we have to do is, what is it we want people to think? What are the words you want to light up in the brain of your audience when they hear the word Europe or any other concept? That's why I've got a picture of Earth here, because research shows that when we see planet Earth, it reminds us that we're all human beings sharing this planet. And that triggers empathy. So we need to be far more strategic in building the ways of thinking, the mindsets that we need for Europe to thrive. And the last piece of brain science, our last question is, these values can't just be words. They have to actually mean something. You have to bring them to life through action and experience. So the last question is, what does it look like for ordinary people to act on your values? So it's not enough for us to just say we're for Europe or for justice or democracy. What does that look like? What are everyday things that everyday people can actually do? Because the key thing from brain science that's really important for our politics is our brain's job is to keep us safe. And safety comes from being part of a group. And so there's this concept called identity protective cognition, which means when we're thinking, we're not motivated by finding facts or philosophy or truth. Our brain's job is to keep us safe. And so we are interpreting information in a way that makes sure we stick in our group, because safety comes from being part of a group. So it's easy for us to see that when populists do that, or people voting for the far right, they want that sense of belonging. But we all do it too. The more intelligent you are, actually, the better your brain is at making information fit your existing ways of thinking. So the point here is, the way to actually create a narrative and bring it to life is it's not just enough to have words, you actually have to think of actions, ways that people can experience your values. In this world where we're about to be overwhelmed by fake AI content, there's no way your message, your ideas are going to get across unless they can be brought to life by real people doing real things on TikTok, on Instagram. What I would often say when, for example, if I work on migration, what that might look like is a dinner where hosts and newcomers are coming together. And so integration, welcoming is actually happening. So the question for us here is, what does it look like to do Europe? What does it look like to be European? I'm going to ask you one last time little question. Hands up who's done Erasmus, the Erasmus exchange? Surely I'm going to see a lot of hands here, yeah. Maybe it's a bit of a cliche, but like what better example of living Europe, of feeling Europe is there than that? Okay, not everyone can do Erasmus, but that is exactly the kind of ritual of democracy that people can feel your message, live your message. So anything you take away from this little talk is, if you have your ideas, that's great, but you have to think, how can people bring those ideas to life through action? That's how we change the narrative. There was a referendum Ireland had in 2009 about whether or not to stay in the European Union. And we tried saying, look at all the material things we get from Europe, the roads, the money, and people were still likely to vote against because of fear, just like in the Brexit campaign. There was a different message that one group tried that was very effective, which was very simply, we belong. And so this giving people a sense of belonging to an identity is the most powerful way to make them support a cause. But that requires us listening to them, engaging with them. So those are our three questions. The vision, what does it look like if we actually achieve our goals? Our values, what's our moral case for change? And action, the story. What does it look like when people actually act on our values? And the last thing I will say is just to want to encourage you to, might seem like naive to talk about things like empathy, but this is actually hard science. Empathy, solidarity, we human beings are wired for connection. These are muscles that we can train. And so we have to train those muscles that we need for the society we want. So what is the story we want to tell? That's the last question for you. We learn attitudes and behavior from the things we see happening around us. So all of us have to make a decision, what kind of story am I going to tell today? Am I going to react to the threats, the danger that I'm worried about? Or am I going to tell my own story that shapes the future I want to see, that makes people believe something different is possible? The story we tell today is the action we take tomorrow. So that's my last question to all of you. What's your story going to be today? Thank you.